Welcome to Current Issues in Athletic Administration. We are here today with Neil LaSalla, longtime athletic director, recently retired. Coach, thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to this podcast and not only participating, but seeing other ones in the future.
Love it. Why don't you do me a favor and take us through your background, both as a coach, as a teacher, as an athletic administrator. What is the journey for how you ended up in not just the athletic director role, but also serving on the board at CSADA for as long as you have, and any national connections that you may have as well? And obviously, ultimately, congratulations on your retirement, but getting to this point as well.
All right, thanks, Justin. Neil LaSalla, I'm married. My wife, Carol, is a retired high school teacher and athletic director. We've been married for 18 years. Bounce things off each other. She also was a CSADA member, still is actually, and an NIAAA member. The journey really started for me when I was a 10th grader, myself in high school, 1980 graduate of Temple City High School. Knew I wanted to be a teacher. My parents were both educators, and I had that exposure, heard a lot of the shop talk, enjoyed being with my folks during the summer vacations. I think that was also a selling point. Jumped on board, went over to Cal State LA, got my bachelor's in physical education, did a follow-up master's in health science, health education, and then another master's in education administration. It's been a lot of fun. I began my career as an educator in 1985, started at Roosevelt High School in East Los Angeles, and then I transitioned after 8 years over to Belmont High School in central area, downtown area. All my time has been as an urban educator, dealing with classroom activities, preparing lessons, and then, of course, coaching and athletic administration. NIAAA, CMAA designation, pursued that, and then became a CSADA member. Was fortunate enough to be asked to be part of the board, so I served as the section vice president representing Los Angeles City section, and I am the president-elect for CSADA, California State Athletics Association, and I'll be put into position, installed for that position in April of 2025. So that's like a snapshot. Live here in Pasadena, but was born here in Pasadena, California. Spent most of my life in the San Gabriel Valley, retired from the Marine Corps Reserve. I had very fortunate to have a civilian employer, Los Angeles Unified School District, that was very military friendly, which allowed me to pursue that 31-year career in the reserves. Retired from that in 2020. Did a couple combat tours in Iraq, was fortunate enough to come back with not too many dragons to slay. But needless to say, it's one of those deals. I think you understand, Justin. Yeah, things that are difficult, things that are tough, you're glad to do it, but you're even more so glad when it's over. I think I owe a lot of my experience as an educator to the people that mentored me, that taught me the right way of doing things. My father, my mother, and then the actual people, the department chairman I've had, and the athletic directors that I worked for and remember, even as an athlete myself in high school. I think the common thread amongst them all is that they always wanted to leave the situation better than the way they found it, and they never lost track of the students and the need for students to be exposed to something bigger than themselves and to have an opportunity to get some life lessons out of whatever they were doing on the court, on the playing field, on the mat, whatever the situation may be. But being an AD is very humbling. There's a zillion ways to make a mistake. And I've seen colleagues removed for being arrogant, for being cavalier. There's just too much happening for us to know it all. And I think probably professional development and things like we're doing here with your podcast series, things like the NIAAA and the LTC classes, which I'm involved with as an instructor at the CSADA conferences. I think those kinds of things give us the upper hand so that we can be prepared for that zillion things that pop up that we can really sometimes come out of left field and really not be prepared for.
I was going to say that's a perfect segue into what I want to ask next, which even though you're retiring, if you weren't, let's say, and by the way, if I got the math, you've been at Belmont since 1993. So that's what, 41 to 31 years?
Correct.
Wow, that's awesome.
Correct.
Congratulations
I
on that.
started with the district in 85. So I had 39 years of service with LA Unified as an educator and coach and athletic director.
Wow. That is not what my children's generation is currently doing. Ultimately, they are 2 years and out. You may be one of the last OGs that's going to go one site type of deal. But what I was going to bring us back to is, even though you are retiring, let's just say you weren't, or you can even answer it if you were, but what weighs most heavily on your mind right now from a professional standpoint, right? What are the things, what is the thing that you're constantly just sitting with?
Yeah, absolutely. A great one, Justin. I think the number one thing that weighs on me, I got actually two things, but really school leaders that don't get education-based athletics. I'm not afraid, never was afraid to speak up to my supervisors. I've always had a knack for being able to do it in a tactful way. I've always been able to stress the points that I think are most salient, germane to the situation. Educational-based athletics and new administrators that come in who maybe don't have a lot of experience with it can pose itself to be a very challenging situation. They're more concerned with graduation rates, English learners redesignating, curriculum issues and delivery of curriculum and modifying curriculum, special education scenarios that they have to deal with and they're confronted with all the time. They forget our athletes they have the best GPAs, they have the best attendance, they have the best graduation rate. They forget that we are a dropout prevention program in every way, shape, and form. So as an urban educator, my whole career, it seemed at times I had to be this advocate that maybe in suburban areas it really wasn't necessary to be because there was buy-in into what education-based athletics brought to the table. So I think that probably is the number one thing. I think another one that weighs heavy is Maverick coaches.
Can we
I know.
pause on that, Coach? I want to dig into this first one a little bit more because you said something that I think is super important for all of us, which is I've never had an issue confronting my superiors because I can do it in a tactful way. Let's dig into that and maybe get some advice
Yeah.
from you
Yeah.
for our colleagues that are staring directly at that, school leaders who don't get athletics. What is the coaching you can give them to be tactful about bringing those things up?
I think again, sharing the fact that what comes out of the factory. So we always use the analogy that the athletic department is like the sausage factory, right? It looks good, it tastes good, but what happens behind the closed doors, the messy, sometimes nasty work isn't always apparent. Showing and reinforcing the fact that, hey, if I need money for this, keep in mind, again, our students have the best graduation rate. They are like the showcase for the school. They have the best attendance. Typically, they have the best behavior. They have the best GPAs. So we have a program that is in every regard a dropout prevention program that I think often is taken for granted. So reiterating some of the simplicity that goes along with the byproduct, what comes out of the sausage factory and which is put on the shelves for everyone to consume, if you will, it becomes very important. And I think also sharing the handbook, you'll hear me refer to this throughout the podcast here today. The department handbook really is your Bible. It's your primer to getting everything downrange the way it needs to be. I know that we've often heard, hey, Coach LaSala, I didn't know about that. I wasn't aware of that. I don't know. Nobody told me. When it's in black and white and you review it at your coaches' meetings and you ask coaches to cite sections of the handbook as a part of the coaches' meeting, it resonates and really drives the point home that we have a a responsibility to learn what's in our handbook and then to deliver everything with respect to being very effective. And administrators, when you have a new administrator comes in who does not have a lot of exposure to athletics, they just see it as like one of those things in the department store of life. Sports are in the toy section. We take them off the shelf, we goof around with them, then we put them back on the shelf, and they just don't understand the nuts and bolts that go into clearing an athlete, looking at making sure the physical's there, looking at making sure the insurance are there, making sure all the documents, whether it's digital or hard copy paperwork is there, making sure that they understand that they're involved in something bigger than themselves and that they have a commitment not only to their teammates, but to the school, to their coach, and whatever they do is a reflection on the family. You know, administrators, they like to show up. I'm not afraid to say this. They like to show up on Friday night. They like to see the football game, and they like to go home with everything being uneventful. We all want that, but they need to understand and appreciate the hard work that goes into it. So driving the point home, I think, in a situation in the second largest school district in the country where I work, driving the point home, you can never do it enough because things get lost in all of the hustle and bustle and the dust that gets kicked up as we move every day in our jobs.
Let me ask this follow-up. And I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, because you mentioned this earlier, that the being in an urban district versus, say, a suburban district, right? And I would imagine that the attrition rate of administrators is a little higher in a district similar to yours. And you are not just constantly needing to re-educate your sitting administrator, but all of those that are coming in throughout the year. So how would you advise building partnership? What hacks have you figured out over 31 years at this location that it's, look, I have lunch once a week with the principal to talk shop, whatever it might be? Just throw a few hacks out there for athletic directors that are maybe facing a similar situation.
That's one right there is at minimum a weekly meeting with them. I think actually too, Justin, showing them, going over with them, say, for example, how a roster is built so they understand and appreciate, just showing them some of the nuts and bolts that I spoke about earlier, sharing with them the sections of the handbook so they understand what the coach's responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are, what the athletic director's responsibilities are. These are very simple, forthright kinds of things, but they can get lost. They can get overlooked. And this again is something that we just can't emphasize enough. They need to understand what we do. And yes, in a school district like the one that I have worked with in for the last 39 years, a lot of things get lost. A lot of things get the shuffle of people. If scores and graduation rate aren't such at a particular school, a director will take that school and remove people, put them somewhere else, bring in a brand new team of administrators and sometimes brand new administrators who have no exposure at all with athletics. So I think we're constantly advocating for who we are and what we do. It can never be done enough, especially because of the changing environment where new people are, without a better way of putting it, coming and going like a revolving door.
Yeah, no, and that makes perfect sense that even if you have consistency, you're constantly educating, but at a place that you're describing that may or may not be your school, if you don't have consistency and you are the consistency, then you are the holder of institutional history, right? And so how are you working tactfully, because that's important, to help the school continue on the path, or even as they're pivoting, here are the things that are able to be a through line based on this institutional memory. And you wanted to mention Maverick coaches. Throw a little bit out about that. We'll see where that goes. And I've got a few follow-ups.
Yeah, Maverick coaches. These are coaches that maybe they'll fundraise illegally. They'll get illegal players on the court when they're not cleared yet. They will practice at times when they're not supposed to practice out of season. Maverick coaches can be the beginning of the end for not just a program, but for an athletic director. And I have a recent instance in our section at a school where it turned into something where eventually the athletic director was let go because it was a successful coach, a coach that had proven himself time in and time again with league championships, with section championships. And then what happens is there becomes this cavalier, untouchable attitude. So this is where we come in as athletic directors, athletic administrators, even our assistant principals, who are often very busy. And I'm not going to say that they don't have enough on their plate, because they have way more on their plate than I think a lot of folks imagine. But at the same time, we have to remind them that they are just as responsible for the coaches and their behavior as we are. So this goes back again to the coach's handbook, and reviewing it as much as possible, at minimum at the onset of each season of sport, so that the coaches understand what their responsibilities are, what they can do, what they cannot do, and more importantly, how they can have the best program possible so that the student athletes gain from it and will put the school in a positive light.
Yeah, I think if I could wrap that one up, how do you thread the needle as an AD between supporting your coaches who rightfully have tunnel vision about their program, and that's what makes them great, with here are the boundaries and constraints that in our space we have to honor? And I joke all the time that I tell my coaches, look, I'm the fun police. And at the end of the day, my job is to help you widen your lens. Yeah. And your job is to try to figure out how to be the best that you can with your tunnel vision. But we got to find that middle ground so that all of us are on the right side of the line when it comes to the audit, so to speak. Yeah. And I think what you shared is, at a minimum, having an annual meeting going through the handbook, constantly re-educating. This year's a perfect example with the wet bulb and the acclimatization that is a top down from the state legislature directive that now is impacting fall sports in a way where I'm looking at it going, hold on, this doesn't impact all sports because it only says outdoor sports. And so ultimately, like, where are these gray areas that you have to get further information on, and you have to then educate, because ultimately you and I in our chair are the ones holding the bag. So I love that. The more proactive you are with your coaches, the better chance you have of doing that. Let me pivot here to LA City section specific questions. So what would you say, Coach, since people that aren't in California listening to this, California is a federation. We have 10 different sections. Coach is the vice president within the Cal State Athletic Directors Association of the LA City section. What is going on right now? What is specific or unique to the LA City section that you guys are wrestling with that it would be good for the rest of the state to know, or for others to know that, and maybe it's not unique to your section, but what are the things that you guys are trying to tackle at your level?
No, that's a good one too. So we're looking at a few things. Like a lot of places, don't see it as really anything that we have to tackle per se, but it's starting to grow and it's presenting itself with a few challenges here and there. But flag football, for example, coming up, the way that the cheerleading has changed seasons. So these things, the cheerleading the competitive cheer, where it used to be spring and then it cycled back and it moved into winter. These are, and I think in an urban school district where space and there's off-campus situations where people have to use parks and rec centers as facilities that they have to utilize to compete. Space type of situations become apparent like never before. Those are things that take place. We do have charter schools. I think probably of all the sections in the state, we are, I can't say this with any kind of certainty, but my guess is we are, if we're not number one, we're in the top 5 with the most per capita charter schools. And charter schools bring something to the table. They're not always appreciated by the regular public schools. They're often looked upon as rapers and pillagers, taking students and taking student athletes from the neighborhood public schools. But in our situation at Belmont High School, where I served, we are co-located with a charter school. We have a great relationship with that charter school. And I think at the end of the day, just understanding that those kids deserve the opportunity to participate and be involved in educational-based athletics, just like anybody else, is the key. So that also involves sharing of space and being on a page, being in a mindset where your own personal interests of your school sometimes have to get put off into the corner for a moment so that other kids from another school can get onto the playing surfaces and reap the benefits of what we do.
Yes, and another note I would make on that is the last piece you said about sharing facility. It comes up now more often than ever, especially in the seasons where I would say sports are impacted, right? You mentioned flag football, which it was decided that it should be a fall sport, which, however you want to feel about that, creates a space issue. I'm sure it would have been a space issue if you tried to play it in the spring as well, but whatever. But when schools call and ask, like right now, our pool is down. Hey, can we come train in your pool? And it's nah. And it's like the value of saying yes, I don't think I want to say people, because I'm in the same boat, understand the social capital that you're building down the road when it's your turn to ask for that favor.
Yeah.
And so I love that. I think that's a great tip to share with not just athletic directors, but administrators as well, right? Like, how are we remembering that we are in community? And while, yes, we are opponents, where we are competitors, where we are rivals, we are still all in community and trying to uplift what's best for kids. So I think that's a great thing to think about in regards to how we go about our day. Okay, something else that has come out of this as we've been growing this show is if you had an opportunity to pin down an AD and ask one question that maybe you've been wrestling with that would help you do your job better, what would that be? And before, I'm going to give you time to think about that. But what you get to do now is answer the question that was brought up on the last episode, which is, what do people actually do in a typical day? These are athletic directors, coach. What do athletic directors do in a typical day that at the end of that day, they feel like they accomplished something and they felt good about it? Because often our jobs, there's a million things going on and we don't have the traditional teaching load. And so we're often felt, what did I do today? And so ultimately, this is a question that came out of the last episode where the athletic director was just like, God, I just want to feel accomplished. So how do other people structure their day? What do they do so that at the end of the day, they do feel accomplished?
Because our job is there's diverse components, and it's really, we engage in a job that can be broken down to 3 separate sections, right? A fall, a winter, and a spring. So what we essentially do is we do the same thing over again 3 times in a row. And I think understanding the timing of what we do, the scheduling of non-league games, clearing athletes, setting up picture day, ensuring that the buses are there when they need to be there, the officials, scheduling, paying the referees and such. When we look at all that and we understand that these are things that are required, what happens is it takes place in the fall. It takes the same exact thing takes place in the winter, and it takes place in the spring. And there's like the nuances. So I think at the end of the day, when I before I go home, I like to make sure that I didn't leave a stone unturned. And I think the best way to leave to leave the office on a day is to actually go back review what you've done, okay, and then underline or highlight. And I think everybody should have, and this is a simple thing. I'm a late baby boomer. I write a lot of stuff down. I put it on a little desk calendar right next to me, and I highlight and I scribble. And what I do with this thing is I review it so that the next morning when I come in, if there's any loose ends that I didn't attend to, Justin, I will have it the next morning, first thing to go through. So I give myself a sense of accomplishment for that one day in written form and cognitive form. And then I have already kickstarted the following day with a few bullets to jump into. And then the cycle just continues itself.
I love that. And I think that will be super helpful for anybody that is listening. The other thing I would add is, how are you determining on your bullet list or checklist of items what's important and what's urgent, right? How are you separating those things into an Eisenhower matrix or something else where you are making sure that the urgent things are getting done while not losing sight of those things that are important?
Anything that has to do with parents, we're going to try to knock that out right away, understandably. I think the other thing, probably anything that has to do with money, or anything that has to do with a physical expiring, an athlete's physical expiring, or their insurance not covering the entire season. Those are the things that take the priority list. So this is, I think those are how I prioritize things. Student conduct, student behavior, depending on the magnitude of it, that can be up at the top of the list, that can be in the middle of the list. It's you go through a day, you sense how the day is going, and you feel your way through that day, and you plug in those tasks where you think the ones that won't take as much time, maybe let me just nail this right away, get it done, right? Maybe just calling and double checking on a bus confirmation number, and then dealing with Joe Schmuckatelli, who told this period 5 teacher to F off. So these are things where we have to be the jack of all trades, because whenever something happens in the classroom and they find out that guy is number 12 on the varsity football team, the first person they come to is Justin and Neil.
I think that goes right back to the very beginning of helping administrators understand the value of athletics, where ultimately they might not be coming to you, but if they're interested in dealing with some of these other discipline problems, because I think you called it a built-in dropout prevention, but it's also a built-in discipline assistance program if administrators understand the leverage that their coaches and athletic directors hold in helping keep kids aligned with the mission and vision of the school. So I love that you brought that into it, because it goes right back to what you started with. Okay, one more question, then I'm going to let you answer the one I prompted you with. What, and this goes back to you have to teleport yourself back to being in the job, not just at the end where you're trying to wrap things up. Actually, that might be a good place. I'm not gonna preface this. Screw it. Here's what we're doing. What issues are consuming most of your bandwidth right now? If we were still in the spring, let's say, and that might not be what's weighing most heavily on your mind, the thing that is this rock you're pushing up the hill, but what are the things that are taking up most of your bandwidth?
Yeah. A lot of things that in my personal situation that were time consuming had to do with deadlines with respect to coaches certifications and money. Two separate things, but at times they can be tied in.
So let's dive into the money piece, because somebody talked about coaches on a previous episode. So let's dive into the money.
Yeah. So a lot of the times you mentioned the spring, Justin. So the budget usually for the next academic year, we generate it and review it for the fall in the spring, and then make some on the fly adjustments during July and August. That, I think, if you're talking about bandwidth and consuming a fair amount of time, I think anyone who has a financial manager on their campus worth his or her weight in gold can have a lot taken off their plate with respect to this. I've been blessed with that. The gentleman, Mr. Argueta, who we have now at Belmont, is just freaking outstanding. I've had some in the past that weren't really of his caliber. It puts a lot more on the athletic director with all the other stuff we have going on. But when you have someone who can give you, who has the intellect and experience to share with you what's doable versus what's not doable, it saves you a lot of aggravation when you're in front of your spreadsheet and trying to do things, when you have some parameters ahead of time going into it.
Yes, I will just say that. I think this is another example of partnership, right? How are we walking alongside of somebody rather than feeling that we are in a vacuum working by ourselves, but how are you partnering with those people on your campus that are going to make your life easier, and ultimately you can hopefully make their life easier as well.
The other thing I would add quick, I know we're going to wind down here in a minute, but the school nurse, for example, LA Unified has a pretty unique situation. It is, I think I may have shared this with you when we were sitting in the terminal there in Florida a couple years ago, but we are, I think, one of the only school districts where the school nurse can trump a physical that a doctor has cleared an athlete on. So for example, again, Joe Schmuckatelli goes to his clinic, he gets cleared, he brings the physical back to the coach, reviews it, just to make sure it's a cursory type of a review, then it gets turned into the health office. The school nurse has the final say on all physicals with respect to that student athlete being cleared in Los Angeles Unified School District. The partnership that you have to maintain with your school nurse, it becomes very important. It's just not like a rubber stamp kind of partnership, which talking to other ADs throughout the country at NIAAA and such, they often can't believe it. What? Your school nurse can decline a physical and have a student go back to the doctor? And the fact of the matter is, yes, indeed, that can happen. So in order to try to mitigate or eliminate these kinds of things from happening, understanding the mindset of the school nurse, drilling that mindset into each of the coaches so that they can continue to drill it into the student athletes when they go out to the clinic or to the hospital and get their physical done to ensure that everything's completed in the right way. It becomes one of the most compelling and bandwidth intensive things that we do.
No doubt. And what I'm thinking about while you say that is how every site is different, right? So how you do things and how I do things, there's probably similarities, there's probably differences, but how do you figure out the most efficient way to do it at your site, whether that be all physicals come through you or you're collecting them from your coaches, whatever it might be, could be unique to your site based on what you just shared, which is the biggest thing that you take away is where are you working? Who are you working with? What are the constraints at that particular site? And how are you going to maximize your efficiency so that we can better serve those kids at that site? Okay, back to your chance now. Something you would like to ask, if we could pin anybody down, and maybe it's something you haven't been able to figure out down there, but what question do you think you would want to ask if you had the opportunity, Coach? Because we will ask it on the next episode of this show.
Okay, so this is like that $64 million question that we're putting out there.
No doubt.
How do you handle a administrator that seems to be taking you as the athletic director for granted?
Such a good question. And we're going to leave it there and let people simmer on that before we get an answer from our next guest.
Who's the next? Yeah, do you know who the next?
Don't know yet. We'll see who gets the wheel of fortune on that question. But Coach, that's such a good question. And I will answer it offline for you when we hang up here in a second.
Give it to Mike Powell.
All right, Coach. I appreciate you taking the time today. Thanks for being on. Looking forward to seeing you in Austin.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Thanks, Justin. And when Mike sees this, I was just kidding, Mike.